This is the Know Your Compliance podcast, the podcast about anti-money laundering and compliance with FinTrack, brought to you by Really Trusted. At the KYC podcast, we believe that knowledge protects and insights empower. And so we'll delve deep into what is happening in the world of anti-money laundering. We'll discuss the challenges that reporting entities are facing, the fines being levied, the tech being deployed, and everything else a compliance officer might want to know about. I'm your host, Greg Dent, and I'm excited to welcome you to another episode as the team and I interview guests and examine stories of real-life fraud and generally geek out to issues in compliance. As a disclaimer, the topics we discuss on this show are typically related to compliance with FinTrack. Nothing said on this show should be considered to be specific advice that can be directly used in your compliance program, as the host and our guests will not know your specific compliance situation. Any advice given should be considered to be for informational purposes only. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Know Your Compliance podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about human trafficking, but not the human trafficking that gets quite as much press. And so I am really excited to be able to have that conversation. Shana McCalla from Find Ontario's Missing Boys is with me today. Welcome to the show. Yeah, so I kind of preface this all by saying this is about human trafficking, but not the usual human trafficking. Let's leave that for a second. Tell me how you got to what you're doing and who you are, where you come from, and why you're doing the work you're doing, I guess. And that'll naturally lead to what it is you do.
I'm a filmmaker. I'm essentially a multimedia producer. So I produce content for film and television and radio. And, you know, as a community advocate, that for me started in the fall of 2024. I became involved when a community member reached out to me, basically letting me know that there was several boys missing from his area. And at the time, I didn't know exactly what was going on. He asked that I share their flyers on my platform, on my radio station, and that I raise awareness around these 6 missing boys. Nobody was talking about. Nobody was amplifying them, and I didn't know that there was that many actually missing. He's a dad. He had a son. He has a son, the same age as the boys that were missing at the time. So it alerted to him, like, what is going on in my area? Why are there, several boys missing, same age as my son? And about a week later, I got a video, saw their names, saw their faces, and as a mother, it struck me like, why is nobody talking about this? And that's when those missing flyers were shared on my radio station platform, and essentially the post just went globally viral essentially, and that sparked more conversations with parents that were reaching out, telling me what had happened to them. That their boys had gone missing. Some, unfortunately lost their boys. They were found deceased. And it was just, why was there, a lack of public urgency surrounding these disappearances? So that's how I became an advocate. Essentially, it felt like what it was like almost overnight, really.
Yeah. That's crazy to me. That's crazy to me that in Canada, and I mean, I've said this before. Okay, let me kind of parse this apart for a second, because I preface this by saying, this is not the human trafficking that people generally hear about. And if we talk about human trafficking, a lot of the emphasis on human trafficking is around girls and sex trafficking. And this is different. And it's prevalent in Canada. And so I think this is the real surprise that I hope our audience is going to really kind of key into it, is that this is happening here at home and at a pretty reasonable rate, and reasonable it's not a good thing in this case, but at a higher rate than I think we'd expect it to. So walk me through give me a little bit more about the detail of that journey of hearing about the first one and then realizing that there was more and then more and then more. Like that's crazy and compelling, I think.
Yeah, I kept asking, publicly on social media, where is the media attention? Like, why is there's no public concern? Nobody's talking about these boys. 6 of them in the fall. By the winter, so I'm into going in, right before the holidays, essentially, of 2024, there were 13 missing boys. So we had more than doubled the missing boys number. One of the original 6, his body was located in Niagara Falls. Had that funeral early the next year. I went to New York. His body actually washed up on the New York side of the border. But he was here in Niagara Falls and had gone missing. His mother traveled here from Jamaica to search for him, and essentially started her own investigation, put together her own search party. And that's, kind of what the pattern has been meeting these families. It's like they jump into action. They will go to the ends of the earth to locate their children. Mothers become investigators overnight, and it was astonishing. So Find Ontario Missing Boys was officially launched the end of that year, early 2025, and I did 5 town halls where I got to meet the parents in person and invited authorities, invited stakeholders, and really held this series of town halls across the Greater Toronto area, inviting people to come out, and that just ramped up the urgency for me, because seeing their faces in person, the parents, the just the grief and the fear, it was overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, look, as a dad, I think, and as any parent, I think it's almost obvious. Like, if you were to lose your child, you will do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to go and find your child. Like that's just kind of the but it's heartbreaking to think of the parents. And it sounds like, and you're hinting at that there, other than the parents, there wasn't really much in the way of action. Is that a fair way of phrasing the initial reaction to these boys being missing?
It definitely appeared that nobody was looking, that nobody was actually actively searching. It appeared to them that way. There was no updates. Some of them had to wait months to get their missing flyers out and posted on, national platforms. And even when they finally did get the flyers out, nobody was really sharing them. Those platforms didn't have a lot of followers. So I really took it upon myself, being that I have a decent amount of followers through my platforms online and a radio station that broadcasts globally. I said, and I have to use my platform as an independent media source to, get the word out there. And the community essentially rallied around it. And we became our own form of a Amber Alert, to be honest.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. So you're able to spur some authority action as a result of the platform. And then what's the result? You found some of these boys have been found. You found it was a much larger problem across the country. There's a few answers to this question, but
yeah,
where does this all go?
There's a lot of answers to the question. So much has happened since. The organization itself, volunteers started coming forward. I put together a Find Ontario Missing Boys committee. Started meeting with authorities across jurisdictions, because learning over time that these cases were more similar than they were different. The boys were being located in what I call the red zones. I coined the term the red zones, and these are northern Ontario towns and cities, some as far as 1,400 kilometers away from Toronto up north. And the red zone list started with like 5 or 6 locations, and now it's grown substantially. And when we locate 2 or more boys in an area, you automatically make that list, and I started traveling. I started traveling with the families, with aunts, uncles, mothers, fathers, trying to locate their children, canvassing, putting up the flyers, talking to the mayors of these cities, talking to the jurisdictional police officers of the city. We went out to Thunder Bay May 2025, where we did a successful 3-day search and rescue out there in in collaboration, obviously, with the Thunder Bay missing persons detective, and the team out there was so great. Small team, but powerful and supportive of the families. And we weren't the first to go out there, is what I found out. There was another father and his wife who had went out. I think it was 2 years previously, and was out there for a week. They also successfully found their son out there after a week-long search. And prior to that, an uncle and a father from Toronto had gone out there to find his 2 sons, and were successful as well. Once you put up the flyers, you start canvassing, you start talking to the community. Quite often, they release these children because they're more problem. They become a problem to them, so they don't want the attention, I feel. And once you're putting that in the spotlight, they know you're there. They see the flyers everywhere. I think that what they're doing, and their criminal organizations are more valuable than these children's lives, essentially. So they want to get rid of them at that point, and they'll release them.
Well, that's both mind-blowing and encouraging, which is that the recovery rate is, I mean, those are good results. Those are, to be able to have found and located and have these boys released, that's fantastic. What's, for our listeners, and I suspect I know the answer to this, but I'd love to hear it. What is the purpose of these boys? Like, what are these boys being made to do, or why do they need the boy? Why do these criminal organizations need these boys? That's the question.
It's labor. Labor trafficking is the main source. Criminal exploitation. There's a grooming process that takes place for vulnerable youth that are susceptible. They target them. They will find them on at community centers, or in the mall, or outside of their schools, or at basketball courts, and they will approach them. They will promise them lavish lifestyles, or buy them lunch for a month, and tell them to invite their friends. And really, this grooming process is very similar, identical to the grooming and coercion that takes place with a young girl that is lured into sex trafficking. Gifting that child, becoming that child's friend, mentor, brother. In the case of a sex trafficking, becoming that girl's potential boyfriend, and gifting them with things, expensive jackets, shoes, new phones, things like that. And they think that the gift is a gift, but then it's a debt bondage. Now you have to sort of work off that gift that you've taken, and it escalates from there. And when you know a lot, you also become a liability as well, right? So there is threats of violence, acts of violence that are done upon these youth. And it's become it's an eye-opening experience over the last 2 years. We're approaching the fall of 2026, and what I've learned about the organizations themselves is that they're very, very, very organized. And that's why we have to be just as organized and more organized to sort of combat this.
So, just to really drill this down to a fine point, these boys are lured into these relationships, these debt bondage relationships, taken to red zones, and then made to traffic drugs, or
Exactly.
what else? Yeah.
Made to traffic drugs, crazy. Made to do other sorts of crimes, really
street level crime type things.
Yeah, it's tied to like the smash and grabs as well, home invasions. So this is really a public safety crisis that we're facing. Unfortunately, in the case of Jayzaya Weblong, he was taken. We don't know the details of why he was taken, but just based off of my experience across cases, he was a boy from Brampton, Ontario, 15 years old, disappeared when his mom went to work, and, was later discovered this year, almost a year to the day, the last time he spoke to his mother in Pelican Narrow, Saskatchewan. That is provinces away, and that's about 8 to 10, depending on how fast you drive, north of Saskatoon, where there's barely any cell phone signal. There's, you're on dirt roads. You are in a community of 2,000 people. How does a 15-year-old boy from Brampton, Ontario get there? And why is he there, right? The investigation is still underway, and we hope to find answers in that because he did not return to his family alive. So, yeah.
That's tragic. And that's really that's the sad and scary piece about everything you've just said is that, and you pointed to it, is the organized nature of the criminality here that's behind all of this. Like, it shows up as a bunch of missing children, but the scary thing is it sounds like it's a system. It's like a system of ongoing victimization that's been set up so that it could just happen again and again and again. How do you think about that? How do we as a society, because I think the vast majority of Canadians would agree. I hope the vast majority of Canadians would agree. That's not the kind of thing we want to have in Canada. So how do we go about disrupting that? What's the key to that?
Yeah, Find Out Your Missing Boys, primarily we operated in the crisis phase of this. So when the child has already gone missing. And now we are operating in the prevention intervention stages. So, we provide family support, systems navigation, we provide referral pathways, we advocate for the family when it comes to authorities so that there's urgency, so that they're looking. Cross-jurisdictional communication is extremely important. We found that, if your child is missing from Toronto and ends up in Thunder Bay, there's a just jurisdictional gap and the communication has to be there. And that is a really important piece here with the case of Jayzaya Weblong. This was RCMP took over the case once they deemed his disappearance suspicious, which was in the summer of 2025. He had been missing from March of 2025. So there's so many different gaps that we have to try now to be that bridge between the families and the existing systems and institutions to try and combat this appropriately. Education, public awareness, all these things are really important. Youth exploitation awareness, letting people know that there are different kinds of human trafficking, and it can appear, sex trafficking is not the only way to exploit a child. And getting, putting together our own research and data was really important. The data just wasn't there. I mean, Black youth, boys represented only 50% of the missing children cases in Toronto in 2024, and that was staggering because we're under 9% of the population.
Wow, yeah.
Just getting institutions and public servants and the education system involved, everybody has to come together, including your audience as well. We can talk about what they can do because, it's so important. Then we started training police officers. I went to Thunder Bay, did a half-a-day training session out there. So really collaborating with police, community organizations, and other systems to really educate and inform because we can all impact this and change the outcomes for children and for their families.
Well, you've hit the perfect segue, I think, and the point that I think really you've answered the question and done the perfect segue all at the same time, because my answer to almost all of the fraud that we see, whether it's pig butchering, whether it's human trafficking, a substantial component of it is education for Canadian society overall. And in our world, education for the frontline professionals, the real estate, the mortgage brokers, who are face-to-face in situations where they might actually be able to help detect some of this. So if you could walk us through, if I'm a real estate agent, I'm a mortgage broker chatting with a client, what are the things that I should be like on the lookout for? How would I know that this might be happening in my community under my nose?
Yeah, it kind of blew me away recently. I spoke to someone who's dealing with her family is currently in crisis, and she pointed out to me an address in Brampton, Ontario, that she knew because of what her family is dealing with, that there were 5 or 6 trap houses operating in that. It's like a it's like a 2-4 kilometer vicinity of Brampton, Ontario. So these trap houses could be hidden in your own community. It could be on your street. Are you seeing high traffic, sort of transient type people, for lack of a better word, going in and out of these homes? A lot of movement happening at night and things like that. Are you owning and operating an Airbnb? They are essentially putting these boys in Airbnbs, and then they have their own private drivers who come up, pick up the boys, and then take them, travel with them to different locations where they have to work 24/7 in a trap house. So, what you can do is really pay attention to who your clients are, which is, I'm sure, is already happening. I'm sure there's a lot going on to be able to qualify for certain things, but they are using women to house these boys and keep them in their homes, and then their own personal drivers, their own personal food delivery systems, transporting them 5, 6 at a time, a lot of times. So really doing what you can. If you suspect something is off, if your intuition is telling you something is off, if you're seeing something like this in a neighborhood where you are showing a house or you have a potential buyer, whatever it is, in the Fifth Estate documentary, they also said that one of the boys, there was, they had a couple people who they had stopped at an apartment building, and one of the men said that one of the young boys that he's seen had to go to the bank periodically throughout the day to make deposits. So these children, a lot of the times, get no money out of this, even though they're promised these lavish lifestyles, and have to make several deposits throughout the day. And if this trap house is bringing in $100,000, $200,000 a day, that's a lot of deposits. So where is that money going?
Mm-hmm.
Where is it being hidden? And the properties that are being used to operate these trap houses essentially are owned by someone. So how do we get to the bottom of that?
Yeah, that's an interesting. So that's a series of things I think that are interesting for people to kind of consider here. So what I heard, and I want to reflect this back because I think this is really important, is no matter what your role in society is, just being aware of the neighborhood that you live in and being aware of that one house that has that much more activity of people coming and going than is quote unquote normal compared to, or maybe if it's a neighborhood of them, the 3 or 4 houses of them, but kind of being aware of how many people are coming and going out of your neighbor's house, which, to be honest, like I'm looking at my window out here to my neighborhood. I have a fairly good idea of how many cars come and go through most of my neighbors just because I sit here often enough. And so I think that's a really real life acute example of something that everybody can do. And then if I going back to the real estate professionals, the crazy opportunity that real estate professionals have is that as a result of being in people's homes all day, every day, they're talking with people about their neighborhoods. They're talking with, when you go to list a home, you're talking with that person about, hey, tell me about your neighborhood. And somewhere in that conversation, they might get a little bit of a glimpse of, hey, that's a house worth watching. And that would be something that a real estate professional could do that might be helpful. That's awesome. And that's super helpful for me in terms of kind of bringing this back to people in a way that's practical and simple and can make a real difference for Canadian society. What else should people know? Is there any other pieces of this that, and then the bank, I don't want to completely ignore the bank part of things, but that's also just part of the coming and going of children. What else? Is there other indicators, other things that people could be keeping an eye on that would be really helpful for them to know, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if they have kids of their own, I think it's important to also pay attention to the signs that might be there for their own youth or the youth that are hanging around their children. A lot of people
Hmm.
have boys between the ages of 9 to 16, and that's the target group, with the core being between 13 and 16 or 12 and 16. But we're seeing as young as 9 years old be targeted for this, right? So paying attention, like, is your child coming home with gifts or clothes that you didn't buy
Mm.
for them, a new cell phone? Is your child hanging around with slightly older peers? Sometimes there's peer-to-peer recruitment going on. Once they have one 15 or 13-year-old child that they've been able to groom successfully, that child can be used, or an older young man, 18, 19, 20, 21, who's was in your neighborhood, maybe graduated from those schools previously, that might be more recognizable to your child, might come back and lure your child away. So, it doesn't only just work for the professionals, it also works for people who have young boys living in the household, who might see their neighbors' kids come over to their house, who might be privy to the conversations that these youth have. Be really wary of that. And the scary thing is, too, your child does not have to leave your house anymore. There can be access within the household, within their own bedroom, through WhatsApp, through Telegram, Snapchat, these sort of apps that are also used at
Mm.
times to recruit children into these criminal organizations, these networks. And unfortunately, that's the way it is with technology. There's pluses, there's great things about technology, and there's a lot of negative things about technology, because now they have easier access to your child. So that's another way that you, as a professional, can kind of, if you have a young child, a boy between that age, make sure that you know who your child is hanging around with, invite them to your house so you can see them for yourself. And the adults that are trafficking these children don't have really have no morals, in my opinion, because the younger and younger, when I got the case of the 9-year-old boy, it was heartbreaking. This child was told, if you come with me to Montreal, I'll help to reunite you with your father. The child was aware his father was living in Montreal, was yearning for his father's attention, and was told, yeah, if, you come with me to Montreal, I'll help you find your dad. And this trafficker had no intention of ever any reunification with the child's father. So
No.
just be aware. And if you see weird people hanging around outside of schools, adults hanging around outside of schools, that should not be there. I mean, these seem like the common sense things, like, but people always think in their mind it's a white van that pulls up, pushes the kid in the van, and the van takes off, like the Hollywood, like the Hollywood vision of what a human trafficking looks like. And it's far more sinister than that. They can hide in plain sight, and it's very terrifying. I don't want to scare people too much, but we have to all work together. And we say in our community, the village, it takes a village to raise a child. And if
Yeah.
you see people hanging around your neighborhood, on your street, and they're older youth, like in their 20s, a lot of times they use those mid-20 young men to recruit the 9, 10, 11-year-old, 12-year-old boys. So just always have your head on a swivel, and and make sure that you are aware of the people in your neighborhood, and how you can possibly inform the authorities in the area if you see anything that shouldn't be going on. Yeah.
That's great. The idea of inoculating your kids, whether it's in person or digitally, and really the answer is both, and those are both their own unique challenges. But the idea of inoculating your kids and making sure that you are involved in your kids' lives enough to know that, hey, that's a new pair of shorts that they didn't have a week ago, and I didn't buy it. That's super practical and tactical. And the other thing I just want to really tease out and emphasize there is this idea that it does take a village. And the reality is that there is a village on the other side of this. Organized criminals are working together. By definition, they've created their own little village. We as a society can only combat this if we create our own village on the other side to counter this. And if we all have a shared understanding of what this looks like. And that's really why I wanted to have you on here, was that if we can all have a shared understanding of what we're looking for and what people need to be worried about, concerned about, thinking about, then I think we put ourselves in a better position to ensure that this kind of criminality doesn't continue, or it certainly doesn't continue unabated. So,
Exactly,
so thank you for that. Those are some really
I'm not
lovely
a
tactical,
FinTrack
practical
expert or
things.
anything, so I leave that to you guys. But like, your audience will understand that world far better than me. But I do bring like the human side, right, of the equation.
Yeah.
And financial crime doesn't happen in a vacuum at all, right? There's transactions, criminal enterprises, illicit economies, right, that are happening.
Yes. And
it's crazy.
That's the fun thing about what the work that we do, and why I think it's really useful and important to have people like you come onto the show here, so that the finance professionals who are dealing in financial crime can see the real world impact of the predicate offenses. And this is the predicate offense, that once the money is created out of the trafficking of the boys, it needs to be brought into the legitimate economy. And that's where our audience can say, oh, well, actually, I observed this, and they can actually see a difference in making it harder, making it less desirable to be human trafficking, to be a human trafficking criminal. I guess that's the right way of phrasing it. If we can make it less desirable, then that's really making an impact for sure. So
yeah, definitely. So that compliance professionals may encounter pieces of information, like a puzzle, right? And then they can put it together. And then that way, whether it's from a parent, police officer, teacher, community organization, like, we can all take part in this. So that's how do we get better at recognizing that these pieces may belong to the same puzzle. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Absolutely. That is the entire objective in my mind. And I think I don't think I could have said it better. So I would ask people to share that idea, to share the idea of educating everyone in our society towards why we do what we do with regards to anti-money laundering. And part of that is to help prevent more young boys or young girls from being human trafficked ultimately. So, and ultimately that leads to a better Canada, I believe. Well, Shana, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate both your thoughts on this. I appreciate how passionate you are on this, and how you've kind of been called to this accidentally, but that you devote your time, energy, and resources to that. It's really inspiring to hear. So thank you for that. Thank you for the work you do, and thank you for taking the time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone wants to find me, they can find me at findontarioMissingBoys.ca, at Find Ontario Missing Boys across social media. Really, like I said, we've become our own community Amber Alert. So every share of every flyer that's posted, is very, very, very important. So I really appreciate the time that you've taken to reach out and to have your audience learn more about human trafficking of children in Canada. Thanks.
Great, thanks. And we'll leave the link to your site in the show notes for this. I hope we'll be able to figure out how to do that. My team will do that for us. So thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Know Your Compliance podcast. If you'd like more information about our guests, have a story idea, or want to be a guest, please reach out to hello@kycpodcast.com. If you want to discuss your anti-money laundering compliance needs with a member of the Really Trusted team, go to www.reallytrusted.com/consult.